Welcome to episode 202 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and this season I've brought on a co-host.
That's me. I'm Jill Nowacki, the founder and CEO of Humanidei.
This episode is sponsored by Trellence. Trellence is a leading technology partner for credit unions, delivering innovative technology solutions to help credit unions achieve more. With a comprehensive suite of analytics, cloud, and talent solutions, the Trellence team ensures credit unions increase efficiency, manage risk, and improve member experience, and we appreciate their support. This season, Jill and I will have conversations centered around leadership, credit unions, living our best lives. We have some exciting guests coming up this season as well from around credit unions who we are grateful to call friends. They'll be joining us on these discussions to share their insights. One other thing before we get into today's topic that I'd like to add is make sure to stick around at the end. We want to make sure that there's some actionable ideas we can leave you with, and we will each give you one of those at the end of the show that you can take with you as you go back to your credit union and lead others. So, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jill to tee up our topic today. What are we talking about today, my love?
All right, Randy. Well, today we are going to talk about optimism, positivity, expecting the best, hope. However you want to position the topic, the idea is this. Exceptional leadership requires optimism, that belief that the future is going to be positive and an ability to instill that belief in others, regardless of what may be going on around you. So we've had long enough careers in financial services to easily call to mind those times when optimism was critical on that industry-wide scale. But every day on an individual or organizational level, people face challenges where positivity is necessary to stay resilient, to move things forward, to come up with the next great idea. So today, that's what I want to talk about. What's the value of optimism as a leadership trait, and how do we cultivate it if it doesn't come naturally? So with that intro, Randy, what do you think? What's the value of optimism as a leadership trait?
I'm very interested to find out how we cultivate it, because if it's not in us naturally. So I mean, as we were thinking about this topic, the first thing that came to mind to me was that idea that, and we all know people, whether we're one of them or not, or which side of this we fall on, where it's like the glass is half full or the glass is half empty. It's a cliche, but I think if we just paused for a minute and started to think, we all have friends, coworkers, whoever it happens to be, that you would definitely put in one of those camps, or maybe in the other camp. And when I think back on different leaders that I've worked with as well, I think there's both sides of that. As somebody who's a glass half full person, I'm an optimist. I mean, I know that. I believe it. I know even from the personality type tests and things like that, I am a person who thinks things will work out one way or the other. Don't always know how. And when I think back, and why I believe that is so important as we lead organizations is, boy, I think leaders need to show that confidence and have that confidence that things will be okay. Whether it's in tough times, we've all faced crisis at some point, I'm sure, as leaders. You don't want to be the one who looks like you're freaking out. That doesn't put a lot of confidence into everybody else, right? Like, and on the same regard, I think just on that day-to-day experience, if you're the negative one, and a lot of the times when I think of optimism, if I'm flipping that around, I think of the complainer, like where everything's wrong, the world is against us. To me, that personally doesn't motivate me. That actually turns me off. So I think it's being optimistic is extremely important. I think during tough times, I think there's things as we get into this conversation that I'll share that I've learned over my not only career, but just being a human on this planet to try to slow things down, kind of take a look at the bigger picture to know. And maybe that comes from some experience that kind of idea that this too shall pass. So with that, I want to bring you in. I don't want to just ramble on about this because there's so much I can say about optimism, but what are your thoughts here?
Yeah. So many years ago, I read about this concept of pronoia, which is like the opposite of paranoia. So paranoia is this feeling that like everything is out to get you. Pronoia is this concept of people are probably conspiring in your best interest. And what a beautiful thought. And so, and maybe sort of the epitome of optimism is that, you know, things are out there coming together for the best interest of you, and not you at the expense of others, but that things are moving toward this place of positivity. And now to say that, the quick response, if you talk about that to somebody who that maybe isn't their natural tendency and maybe a bit more more skeptical when you say, well, yeah, you should believe this.
Or
They'll come
someone
back
in
with,
between.
they'll come back with, you think that's a radical optimism right there. But somebody else might come back with it and be like, yeah, I'm a realist. And this concept of that the difference between the other end of the spectrum from optimism is realism. I would challenge back on that because I think it's absolutely possible and in fact critical to be optimistic with a balance of an ability to know that things could go wrong, to know that things might be going wrong right now, in fact, and holding that belief that even though despite that we run into challenges, things are going to work out in the end. And that's where I think it's not just about optimism, but it's also about some resilience because it's really hard to bounce back or bounce through hard times if you're like, and probably the sky is going to fall at the end of this. From a leadership perspective, to your point, who wants to work for that leader? Like if you come in, if your leader every day is like, we're probably just going to merge, probably just going to go out of business. You're smart. You might be optimistic that things are going to work out, but you're like, they're probably going to work out at another organization. So I'm going to go ahead and dust off my resume and go look. It's real tough to stay engaged when there isn't that level of optimism at the leadership level.
Something I was thinking about, and this is just takes it down to maybe more of a personal level, but when you were talking, it popped into my head was quite a few seasons ago. I think it was Rachel Pross who was on the podcast, and she mentioned that something that she had taken to was kind of like pausing and looking out and saying, is this still going to stress me out a year from now? And if the answer is no, it's not, then how much weight do you want to give that today? It doesn't mean you don't deal with it, but how much does it sit with you? And I don't know. That's something that's always stuck with me as well. I want to ask you a question on this because I do want to hit it kind of earlier is you and I are both optimists. And I think as you were talking through that, you may be an extreme optimist. And it's interesting, you mentioning like saying, well, I'm a realist. That's something that I would say about myself, but it doesn't take away from being an optimist as well. So to me, they're not different sides of the coin. That's something I journal about often is what is. So I can accept what is. And that's what's happening right now. That's that realism sign. What I control is my reaction to it. And I can choose to be positive and a force of good or a force of joy or a force of peace, or I can choose to be negative and be angry and be whatever that may be and kind of a force the other way. So if somebody is sitting there and in the very beginning of this conversation, when we were kind of introducing the topic and when like I first started saying what I had to say, if someone is like, I am a glass half empty person, I see the pitfalls and everything, or maybe they don't know it. Maybe you work for one. Maybe you have somebody on your team that is, and you know they want to be a leader someday in the organization, but you're like, you need to work on the positivity side or whatever it happens to be. If it's not our natural state, what can we do to be more optimistic, I guess, if that's a thing?
Yeah. And there are many tricks and traits. I love what you just shared about Rachel. You gave a very specific, like, how am I going to feel about this 1 year from now? What that comes down to is perspective, right? That like keep the perspective in the situation. And in many cases, being able to keep some perspective can create some positivity. It's also there just that what you shared about your own strategy of being thoughtful about it, being intentional about it, and you like recognizing what you have control over. Because a lot of times it can feel very defeating if what we see is something happening in the world around us and we're thinking, boy, this is happening to me. It's hard to feel like I have any control over that. But that cognizance that you can control the outcome. You know, I recently saw this example. Nav Khanna, who's the CEO at First City Credit Union down in Los Pasadena and has branches in Altadena, which is one of the communities that's been heavily impacted by the wildfires down there. And Nav had a post on LinkedIn recently that was a photo of a firefighter who was in the process of actively saving their branch there at First City at that moment. And Nav's response was gratitude. Like, this is a hero. I'm so thankful for what he did. Is it hard to be optimistic in the face of devastation like that? Absolutely. And we shouldn't be optimistic at the expense of empathy too. This is not dismissive. This is not saying, oh, well, that's not really that big of a deal. Like, it's a huge deal. But that ability to say, even in this devastating time, there is something to be grateful for. And I think cultivating that gratitude, looking for those moments of gratitude, can also lead to optimism and that future, that future outlook that, hey, if there are people here that we can be grateful for, if there are things here we can be grateful for, we can believe there's another side of this.
Just because you brought up the wildfires, we'll make sure to link in the show notes to CUAid, the National Credit Union Foundation's program that has been activated to help the California wildfires and our credit union friends that are there. I kind of want to dig into that a little bit more. If you're a leader, we're not talking maybe that big picture, but we're talking every day. I know, like, I can think back to earlier in my leadership journey, I loved poking holes in things and I loved people poking holes. And then I got to a point where I was like, if you're going to poke a hole, have a solution on the other side of it. Like, it can't all just be negative. You can't just come in and go, no, that won't work. Well, that will. Bring something else to the table, right? Like that type of a thing. If you're a leader in your credit union and you have a team and maybe you have somebody who's super smart, really like them, but maybe they bring the negative energy to they don't seem very optimistic in the meetings, right? Like, doesn't mean they're not adding great points, but how do you help them move along to maybe be that future leader, to that somebody that can lead others and not just kind of bring down the mood?
Yeah. With so many things there, we live on a continuum, right? And it's oftentimes the right place to be is in a position of balance, not an extreme on either side. And so the beautiful addition, the value that somebody who can analyze those pitfalls, who can look at something and say, here are all the things that can go wrong, is, let's be real. You're more likely to actually manifest that reality of things working out if you think about the things that might go wrong and plan for them, prepare for them, build up resilience against those things. And so if you do have someone on the team, though, whose natural inclination is to be in that place of, ooh, all of these things may go wrong, putting them in a position where you also ask them some follow-up questions of, okay, if that goes wrong, what might we do then? How might we handle that situation? And calling them to that. And if you're in a group meeting, now certainly there are other elements too, like, let's assume there's a certain level of trust on this particular team so that conversations can be candid and feedback can be authentic with that. But if you're in that situation with a group of individuals who trust each other enough to have these candid conversations, and one of them is saying, here are all the things that can go wrong, making it all play a team conversation where it's like, okay, great. If that happens, are we prepared to deal with it and how? And that leader who can say, you know what? You're right. These things might go wrong, but I have confidence in this team because here are the things that I've seen you do really well, or here are the strengths that I know we have. That sounds like a level of optimism that I would like to think instills some, sorry, they can't see my hand gestures here, but some get up and go, some rah from the team that then they can also carry that optimism through. And frankly, hopefully that person who's asking those hard questions, what if this goes wrong, is something that the optimists on the team can say, if that goes wrong, here's how we'll deal with it and still engineer ourselves to this positive outcome. Because that, again, going back to, I'm just kind of repeating myself now, so it's clearly time for me to stop talking. But that concept of we are more likely to get the outcome we want if we think about the things that may get in the way of that outcome. And instead of just throwing our hands up and saying, oh, nothing can be done, we identify how to solve for those.
I was just going to add that I think as a leader, you need to be able to look past the objections, look past the roadblocks, if you will, and be able to move and lead forward. Like, even when times are darker, the goal is still to come out better on the other side, correct? Sometimes a goal might be that we need to get back to where we were, but then I don't think most of the time it's, so then we stop. Like, it's like we want to continue to progress. We want to do better. We want to be better as individuals and organizations. I'd like to kind of, if you want to say, pivot the conversation a little bit when it comes to optimism and leadership in general. But this idea, is there such a thing as too much? I mean, I'm trying to think out there if I've worked with somebody who I thought was too optimistic. I know there have been conversations. Sometimes you and I have had conversations where I'm just like, that's nice that you think like the entire world is working for you, right? Like, that to me is, I'm just like, oh no, they might have their own self-interest in mind too, right? Like, this is still a business. I mean, the amount of times that I've said that, is, people are still in business, right? Like, it doesn't mean that everybody can't win. I'm a firm believer in that there are win-wins out there. But anyways, is there such a thing where being too optimistic maybe gets in the way of, let's use progress?
Yeah. I hesitate to say too optimistic, but I will say unchecked optimism can be a problem. The balance is what's so important. And so what I can think of is there's this question, and the tone with which you ask the question implies a very different meaning. And it's kind of this, what could possibly go wrong? And so if you are an unchecked optimist, it's like, I'm going to do this, and what could possibly go wrong? Like, oh, let's change the tone of that question. So we're actually not asking it rhetorically. Let's actually ask ourselves, what could possibly go wrong? And let's dig into that a little bit. So the problem with that unchecked optimism is that idea of somebody's like, okay, we're going to launch this new program and we're just going to roll it out and it's going to be great. It's going to be fine. Okay, well, did you think about the timing of the program? Did you think about the needs that the community has for it? Did you think about all of these elements that with just a little bit of what could possibly go wrong? Well, we could offer this program and no one could sign up for it. Okay. Well, how do we roll it out in a way that does increase the likelihood somebody signs up for it? Because then it won't go wrong. So that would be I don't know if it's too much optimism, because I'm all for hey, let's do it. That's how new ideas, in my opinion, get launched. But if it's done without that balance, and I will say if an individual doesn't have it, and sometimes, as I'm describing this person who's like, what could possibly go wrong? There are probably a lot of leaders out there either thinking of themselves early in their career or thinking of someone they work with closely who maybe is a little earlier in their career. There's an implication of some naivety that comes with youth on that.
Okay.
But we could partner that person with somebody who thinks differently.
I was just going to say, but then because I was thinking of somebody younger with less experience also while you were saying that. But as soon as you said that out loud, I was like, and then there's the flip side where the cynicism comes in and it's like, oh, credit unions are over.
Or we've tried that before.
Yes.
It doesn't work.
Right.
I'll try it again with a different flavor to it.
So that's an interesting thing. I mean, just to think about how, depending on where we are in our careers, our life experiences, whatever it happens to be, where do we fall? And I'm sure, I think we could all look back at different periods of time during our lives where we were more optimistic or not. And that ebbs and flows as well, like in our individual selves, obviously, as well as it would, I guess, as in an organization. So something I was just thinking about this and now I'm losing it. This happens a lot. I turned 50, so I'm taking creatine now because it's supposed to help my head. So it's, anyways, my brain function.
Is it about the youth of the naivety?
No, it wasn't. But I think actually the direction that I was going was just along the lines of when we're sitting there and we're looking at something that is daunting. If we are looking at something that is maybe bringing our optimism back, if there is something that's going on in the world that's maybe affecting us on a personal level, that then we're bringing into our work environment as well. Any tips, tricks, hacks that you've come across in life to be able to say, like you said, it doesn't mean that there's not empathy. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that this isn't a thing. But to give the wildfire example, if you're just sitting there and you're like, well, everything's burning, we're done. You sure hope the firemen aren't doing that, or the fire people, right? Like, I mean, it's just, so anything that you've picked up, I guess, or that you suggest along the way to
keep you from just throwing up your hands and feeling defeated.
Like, I'm all done. This is it,
Yeah, and that is a reality. And we've had those conversations with people throughout life that it is kind of well, we're pretty much done here. And I've mentioned before a conversation I had with my friend Brad Bergmoser, where he was talking about, and he's a younger CEO in the credit union space, and kind of had this conversation where, someone sort of told him, you turn out the lights on your way out. Because essentially, if we're leaving the industry, clearly there's no future for the industry. And then you talk to somebody like Courtney Ainsley over at at Filene, the cooperative trust. And she's like, I got this whole generation of leaders that I am cultivating and growing who are ready to keep the lights on in this industry, right? and so much optimism there. And so
don't turn off the lights yet.
Sometimes there is a seasonality. There is sort of this like hubris that we hold that does cause us to think, well, if I'm not here to make sure, it's hard to be optimistic about the future. And there is kind of that, well, just throw your hands up on it. And I think in those situations, surrounding yourself with someone who has a different outlook, giving yourself a chance to engage with someone who is optimistic about that thing where you are challenged. Now, this again, this isn't encouragement to like Pollyanna your way through life with like, everything's going to be fine. But there is a certain amount of optimism that is necessary in order to have the resilience to get through those hard things. And that's where I think, so in some cases, it has to do with the environment you're in and making sure you're surrounding yourself with people who can see the upside to it, who can bring that value. And sometimes I think just as simple as and as cliched as it might sound, is kind of reminding yourself that you're not dead yet. Like you've made it through all of these hard things so far. And maybe like taking what Rachel said and thinking back, like what was really bothering me a year ago? And where do I stand on that now?
Yeah,
if I got through that, can I get through this too?
So I'm going to touch on one of these things that we're probably not supposed to touch on, but it's been a conversation that we've been having, but I'm going to take it in a different direction because I think we can be fairly broad when we talk about this, but it's very easy. And I believe that, and like with social media and algorithms and all of those type of things that have inundated our lives over the past decade, let's call it, it's really easy to find outrage.
Yeah.
And like I say, we can be broad on this because it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're on. It's very easy for people to find outrage and to get that confirmation bias of their outrage. The one thing, and I know I'm just springing this one on you, so I'll give you a second to kind of think through this, because something I've noticed with myself is to take a step back from the outrage and to be able to say, what can I do with that today? And if the answer is nothing, there's nothing I can do today. I can't let that outrage now affect the rest of my day, my relationship with you, my partner in life, my relationship with my team, the relationship with others that I come in contact with. Okay. It doesn't change what I believe.
Right.
It doesn't change what others believe. That's another thing we know from social media and stuff. We're not changing people's minds here every day. But taking, for me, and just to throw out my little piece of advice on that, is to take that beat, take that pause and say, okay, it doesn't change it. It doesn't mean that I'm not empathetic towards others that are dealing with this as well. But we do still have to function today. Thoughts, I guess, as far as not only personally, but when we're talking about being the leader of an organization, if something's hitting you hard and that outrage, and then you have a staff meeting or you have a board meeting, and knowing, I would say today, that there's a really good chance no matter where you fall, half the room doesn't agree with you. They don't have the same outrage. They may be celebrating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thoughts? Staying optimistic there?
So I believe that optimism is an important tool in allowing us to be constructive with that potential outrage and how we may channel it. And so maybe we're not supposed to talk about this, but I will address an elephant in the room. My company's name is Humanidei. DEI is in the name of the company. I named it in 2019 that way because I stand firm in values that I believe that when companies look toward diverse, equitable, and inclusive solutions, they build stronger organizations. And I stand firm in that today, regardless of, which way the winds might blow on how positive we associate those terms. And it could be very easy in this particular environment to say, oh, crap, I sure messed up naming my company that. Or, maybe I should be looking at a rebrand on that. But my optimism leads me to believe that despite certain tones or certain perspectives, that there will be progress that will continue to be made toward a world that is socially just, and that organizations will continue to believe that they are strongest and best when they create an environment where all people feel a sense of inclusion and belonging.
Right.
And so are statistics on my side right now? Maybe not, but optimism is. And I run a team that, I don't want my team coming to work and saying, hey, Jill, we've got to go find jobs somewhere else that has a different name. I want to cultivate that optimism in them as well, that they can believe with confidence that the work they do is good work, that the work they do matters, and that the work they do is creating a stronger credit union system. Because that is our focus. Like, we are not trying to change federal government.
Right.
We are not trying to change Apple or Amazon or American Airlines or Facebook, Meta. We are focused on credit unions. And so it is that optimistic belief that I have that, and I've said this many times before, that when credit unions work according to their mission, that they can eradicate global poverty. Like, that may be radical optimism, right? Like, that may be something. But I have to stand firm in that value in order to take the small steps toward constructive change. And if I do get to a point that says, credit unions are just another commoditized financial institution and it doesn't matter what we do and we're led by a bunch of bankers who came over to this side, then yeah, it's a lot harder to keep things moving forward. So I guess I believe that optimism isn't just about skipping through life with a, field of joy surrounding you, but it is about being able to stand convicted in values and to create constructive solutions that continue to move things forward in tough times too.
I think something you said there is so important, though. You can look at the big picture and then still bring it back down to what you're going to do today. What you have the ability to, that kind of goes to me back to the control. You have the ability to control you today. You don't have the ability to control federal policies today.
Right.
They're not changing today,
Yeah.
right? Like,
and maybe this does go back into that idea of unchecked optimism. Like, if you are so optimistic that you believe you can change the entire world, that may generate a certain level of outrage because it's probably not going to happen as fast as you want to see that happen. So, it is. I mean, maybe there is something to channeling that optimism toward like our own little corners of the world too.
Or what we can do today.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the steps forward.
And certainly easier to be optimistic when you see progress. And so this makes me think oftentimes I envision a chart. And if you hone in on a 3-day period of this chart, it looks like extreme volatility.
Yep.
But if you zoom out and you look at it from a year or a 5-year period, like it's a little more smoothed out. And so I think sometimes when we're looking at our progress on that huge scale, it may feel different than if we zoom in a little bit on that.
And I do think that, celebrate wins, right? Like, small wins take place all the time and be grateful for those. So
Absolutely.
Before we get into wrapping this up and kind of leaving with our takeaways, is there anything else that you were hoping that we were going to talk about today that we haven't hit on yet? I see you looking down at your notes.
I know. I'm like, I don't know. I guess a point that I might punctuate, and we kind of stepped over it really quickly, but is that when we talk about optimism and we talk particularly about applying optimism during crisis, is that as leaders, we have a responsibility to be empathetic to those who may feel more defeated. This is not toxic positivity that we're talking about, to use a term from modern nomenclature there. Like, we're not talking about just smile through it, sunshine and rainbows. And as leaders especially, it is on us to create environments with authentic optimism, not a, hey, we don't want to hear your naysaying, so if you don't have something nice to say, just leave the room. Like, we need to hear.
Push it down. Just push it down.
Yeah. Like, we need to hear those concerns. We need to be empathetic to the concerns, the fears, the challenges our employees are facing, and helping them move to a place of seeing the bright side of that, doing that with empathy as we move through that.
What would you like to leave our listeners with today?
I was really hoping you would go first on this one today.
Would you like me to?
I would love that. Yeah. What is your key takeaway?
My key takeaway is something that I've been trying to work on a lot, I'd say, over the past year. And it's kind of like taking that beat and remembering what I can control. And this actually came from, and I'll link to one of my favorite books by this fella. And in the beginning of the year, it's not a bad time to look at it, but it was called The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. And I subscribe to his email as well, where you just get this little email every morning, and they could link to that as well. But the one day it was talking about, and I think it was from Meditations and Marcus Aurelius, but it was this idea of that what we control in any situation is our reaction. So whether it's my reaction, I try to think about that every day, my tone, which I sometimes suck at, but the reaction that I have to things. And that is something that I guess I would just tell everybody to stop and think about is when something hits you, when you're going through a situation, to pause and say, okay, how am I going to react to this? What's my outlook? Am I going to choose to have a positive outlook on it to try to figure out? I can just sit here and complain and be like, sucks as long as I want. But what can I do to have that positive outlook? What do I want to put it out into the world, into my team? And, can I choose, because I'm an optimist, to be the positive force, be the peaceful force, be the joyous force, because that's my reaction. Does that mean anything is going to change? Why not? But I can deal with it again the next time too, right? So that's what I would leave you with. Look at what's inside your control. Be the positive force that comes out of it.
And I guess my key takeaway is this. Well, I'm talking today and I'm emphasizing today the value of optimism as a key leadership trait. I also want to give some grace to our leaders out there and say, despite the fact that I'm encouraging this optimism, I'm putting this responsibility on leaders to create that culture in their organization. Leaders are human too. And leaders are going to have a bad day. So if you end up as a leader being like, today is not the day that I can give the rah-rah cheers to my team, making sure you have the support that you need as a leader to build that resilience, to come back later and infuse that optimism. So whether that's, knowing you've got that environment at home where you can express those concerns, or you're seeing an executive coach or a therapist or something, taking a hike, but giving yourself that space to sit with the feelings of discomfort you might have too, so that you don't err into that side of sort of unchecked optimism, blind optimism, toxic positivity, but that you're being able to authentically show up with that optimism that really curates resilience. So as a leader, yes, it's absolutely important, but recognize your humanity and give yourself the resources you need to be able to continue to cultivate that optimism.
Well, one last one. I'm going to put you on the spot again. You didn't have one last time. Any book recommendations?
No, you know what? I'm working through...
We have a new one that our friend Yulia gave us I think you said Tansley had talked about before as well.
I think that I've heard it from Tansley and her colleague Danielle Frawley there at CFCU. I know I've heard it from my colleague Jamie Marks. She talks about it a lot. The title of that book is Unreasonable Hospitality.
I just downloaded it on Audible and we'll be listening to it on the plane as we head out to a conference.
We'll have a couples book club here.
That's right. So if anybody else wants to join the book club, wait, what was the name again? I'm sorry.
Unreasonable Hospitality.
That's right. It's from the guy that the Michelin star
I don't
restaurant.
know how to say his last name. It's like Mark Guida or Judah.
We will link to it. So anyways, and maybe we can talk about that again next time or on the socials if anybody else has read it. A few things before we go. As always, we'll link to everything we just talked about in the show notes, including the books. And I would throw out there, I mentioned it last time, Jill's very active on LinkedIn. She lets me know what's going on in the world. I try not to be on the socials as much as I used to. But we would love to hear from you. So if you've read that book or you're reading one or you have a suggestion for us, we would love that. Share your thoughts, ask questions, give feedback, suggest future topics or some guests we should have on the show. We'd love to hear from you. Also, please take a minute in the show notes to check out our sponsor, Trellance. Trellance is a leading technology partner for credit unions and a great supporter of ours. So we can have this much fun doing what we do. And so I really appreciate if you give them some love. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We're on each and every one of those. You can also Google the CUInsight Experience podcast book list and we'll link to everything. And you can next read can be on its way from Amazon or as Jill does on her Kindle or as I do on Audible. Last but certainly not least, we want to thank each and every one of you for listening. You all rock. We appreciate you all. And it's kind of that time of year. We look forward to seeing everybody out on the road at conference season. So be well, friends, and hopefully see you soon.